Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into Peril by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa.
Oh, Peril.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. It really takes us behind the scenes of one of the most tumultuous periods in recent American history, the transition of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden.
It really does give you a front row seat to history.
It does.
You know, hundreds of hours of interviews, access to a trove of documents. You get a really intimate look at this really pivotal moment in American history.
Absolutely. It takes us beyond the headlines and the snippets we might have caught on the news.
Right.
You really get a feel for what was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The anxieties, the decisions, and honestly, the chaos of it all.
One of the things that really struck me right off the bat was the book's portrayal of the international community's reaction to the events unfolding in the U.S., especially in the wake of the January 6th Capitol attack. China was on high alert.
It's easy to forget, looking back, just how much uncertainty there was at that time.
Oh, yeah.
But Peril reminds us that many world leaders were watching the U.S. very nervously.
Especially China.
Especially China, yeah.
I mean, the book reveals that Chinese intelligence had been watching Trump for months, and they had come to this conclusion that he might actually be willing to create an international crisis, even a war, in order to hold on to power. And then January 6th happened, and that just, amplified those fears.
Imagine being in China's position, right? They're watching all of this unfold, seeing this unrest and division within the United States, and they're genuinely worried about what Trump might do.
Yeah, Peril recounts this very tense phone call. It took place between General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and his Chinese counterpart, General Li Zucheng. This call happened just hours after the January 6th riot, and Milley's goal was to assure Li that the U.S. was not falling apart and that things were under control.
That's incredible. The book really highlights how important Milley's actions were during this time. He was walking a tightrope, trying to manage a volatile president.
Oh, absolutely.
And also reassure global powers that the U.S. wasn't about to do anything rash.
He went to some extraordinary length. For example, Milley even postponed some planned U.S. naval exercises that were supposed to happen near Taiwan to avoid any potential escalation.
Wow.
These were delicate times, and he was trying to prevent any misunderstandings, prevent a possible conflict.
Really a stark reminder of how fragile things can be on the global stage, especially during times of domestic turmoil. And Peril really paints a vivid picture of how those in power had to navigate those tense weeks and months.
And it wasn't just international relations that Milley was concerned about. He was also grappling with concerns much closer to home.
Right.
Peril also talks about the anxieties surrounding Trump's mental state and his access to nuclear weapons.
It's a chilling thought, but it was a very real concern at that time.
Oh, it was. The book recounts this phone call between Nancy Pelosi and Milley. Pelosi expresses her anxieties about Trump's stability and his potential to use nuclear weapons as a last resort to hold on to power.
Yeah, and her concern in the book is just palpable.
Oh, yeah.
She asks Milley directly, is there anything that can be done to prevent Trump from initiating hostilities, including taking his hand off the nuclear button?
It really underscores the anxieties that so many in Washington were feeling at the time.
For sure. These revelations in Peril really add a whole new layer of understanding to those final days of the Trump presidency.
Yeah.
And while the book doesn't explicitly say whether or not any measures were taken to limit Trump's access to the nuclear codes, it does really highlight Milley's determination to prevent any unlawful use of American military power.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a really central theme that runs throughout the entire book. And that is the tension between a president who was seemingly determined to break with all the norms and those within the government who are working to keep things running smoothly and prevent terrible outcomes. It was a real tug of war, and the stakes couldn't have been higher.
Yeah, on the one hand, you have Trump, who is portrayed as increasingly isolated, distrustful, and determined to hold on to power no matter what.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have these individuals like Milley and others who are trying to uphold their oaths, protect the country, and make sure there's a peaceful transition of power.
Exactly. It was a very precarious time, and Peril captures the intensity, the uncertainty of those final days of the Trump administration. The authors did an amazing job bringing those events to life with their interviews and behind-the-scenes information.
Yeah, and it's not just the drama unfolding in the White House that makes this book so interesting to read.
Right.
The book also covers the Biden campaign, offers a look at the decisions they made and the challenges they faced trying to unseat Trump.
Yeah, Peril isn't just about the end of the Trump era, it's also about the beginning of the Biden era. It's fascinating to see how these two stories are woven together.
Yeah, I was really struck by how the book portrayed Biden's approach to the campaign. He framed his candidacy as a battle for the soul of America, which was a direct contrast to what he and many others perceived as Trump's very divisive and destructive rhetoric.
That idea, the battle for the soul of America, really resonated with voters who were tired of all the drama and division. They wanted things to calm down and get back to normal.
And of course, you can't talk about the 2020 election without talking about COVID-19. It was such a huge factor that shaped the campaign and the transition of power.
It really was. Peril takes us behind the scenes and shows how Biden and his team had to change their campaign strategy because of the pandemic, address the anxieties and uncertainties it caused. They had to be very careful about what they said, focus on being hopeful and resilient, and emphasize that they could provide the steady leadership needed in a crisis.
It's interesting to see how those early days of the pandemic really shaped how Biden approached governing. He came into office with this clear sense of urgency, knowing he had to address the pandemic head-on and provide relief to those who were struggling.
Peril gives us a window into those early days of the Biden administration,
Yeah.
highlighting the challenges they faced, dealing with a divided Congress, managing the ongoing pandemic, and figuring out the best path forward.
Peril really covers a lot, from the international tension
Yeah.
to the political battles within the U.S., and from the personal struggles of those in power to the anxieties of everyday Americans.
It really does. It's a comprehensive look at a really historic period.
Yeah.
A very thought-provoking look.
Absolutely. It's one of those books you just keep thinking about long after you've finished it.
For sure. And we've really only scratched the surface here.
Right.
There's so much more to unpack and talk about.
There is. So let's continue our deep dive and explore the next chapter of this story, the aftermath of the election and the chaos that followed.
Picking up where we left off, Peril really takes us deep into that post-election period.
Yeah.
A time just marked by so much uncertainty and escalating tensions as Trump refused to concede.
It does a great job of capturing the disbelief and the defiance within Trump's inner circle.
Oh, yeah.
As they were clinging to the hope that they could somehow overturn the election results. It was a time of wild theories, legal battles, and a lot of pressure on everyone around Trump.
One of the most fascinating parts of Peril is how it portrays the people who were around Trump at the time. You've got Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, who were promoting these crazy claims about voter fraud, which ended up alienating even some of Trump's allies.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
I know.
As you read about their increasingly desperate attempts to challenge the election results, throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick.
And the book really shows how their actions, even though they were trying to help Trump, actually damaged his credibility and further isolated him from people who might have been able to help.
And then there's Attorney General Bill Barr.
Right.
Who had been a staunch defender of Trump throughout his presidency. But you start to see him distancing himself.
Yeah, as he got more and more worried about what the president was doing.
Right.
Barr's disillusionment with Trump is a major storyline in Peril. It describes how Barr reached a point where he felt he couldn't support Trump anymore, especially the claims about widespread voter fraud, which Barr knew were baseless.
It really does.
Yeah.
And their relationship, which had once been so strong, completely falls apart.
Yeah.
Peril actually describes a confrontation between the two of them.
Yeah, big one.
Which leads to Barr resigning.
Yeah.
And you can feel the tension.
Absolutely.
The weight of that moment when you read it.
It's a really good example of the struggles going on within the Trump administration. As Trump became more and more detached from reality and dug in on the idea that the election was stolen.
And then, of course, we come to January 6th.
Right.
A day that will forever be a part of American history. Peril doesn't hold back in its depiction of the fear and the chaos that took over the Capitol building as the rioters broke in.
It's a tough read, as you see through the eyes of those who were actually there that day, how vulnerable American democracy is and the very real threat of violence that was unleashed.
It's pretty harrowing, but the authors do a great job of capturing the heroism of those who defended the Capitol.
Yes.
Like Eugene Goodman.
Right.
The Capitol police officer who single-handedly diverted rioters away from the Senate chamber.
Yes.
Potentially stopping something much worse from happening.
Goodman's courage is one of the few bright spots in a very dark day for democracy. And Peril reminds us that even when things are really bad, there are people who step up. People who are willing to put themselves at risk to protect others. and stand up for what's right.
Yeah, and in the aftermath of January 6th, Peril shifts its focus to the transition of power and the challenges facing Joe Biden as he prepared to become president. You really get a sense of the responsibility he felt, knowing that he was inheriting a deeply divided nation in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
With a lot of problems to solve.
It's interesting how the book presents that contrast. On one side, you have Trump still insisting that the election was stolen and refusing to admit defeat.
Right.
And then you have Biden, focused on the job ahead of him and determined to project an image of stability and unity.
And Peril describes Biden's style of governing as very deliberate and pragmatic. He comes across as someone who really believes in serving the public, who thinks unity is important, and who's willing to work with the other side to find some common ground.
And yet he's doing all of this in a political landscape that is so divided, with Republicans still very much aligned with Trump and his ideas.
The book really highlights how difficult it is to govern in such a polarized environment, and it constantly tests Biden's commitment to bipartisanship as he works with a Congress that doesn't seem to want to compromise.
One thing that Peril reveals is all the maneuvering that was going on behind the scenes and the tough negotiations during this time. For instance, there's a really interesting description of a meeting between Biden and a group of Republican senators who were proposing a much smaller COVID relief package than Biden wanted.
That's a great example of how Biden tried to balance his desire to work with both sides with the need to keep his promises and address the urgent problems the country was facing.
Yeah.
And Peril gives you this glimpse into how Biden negotiates, how he listens to different perspectives, and his willingness to compromise, while also sticking to his principles.
Peril also looks at some of the big policy decisions Biden had to make early on in his presidency, like pulling out of Afghanistan, dealing with the pandemic, and trying to address racial injustice and climate change. These are really complicated issues, and the book does a good job of explaining the factors that influence those decisions.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me is how Peril shows the human side of politics. We see real people dealing with really difficult situations.
Yeah, for sure.
And the book captures their worries, their frustrations, their moments of success and failure.
You see the toll that all the pressure and attention takes on them. It's a good reminder that even the most powerful people are still just people.
Right.
Trying to navigate a complicated and unpredictable world.
And it's not just about the big names, the presidents and the generals.
Right.
Peril also acknowledges the work of all the people behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
The advisors, the strategists, all those who play a crucial role in what happens.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just made by individuals. It's made by teams of people working together, often in really tough situations. And it's a real testament to the people who work in government, no matter what their political beliefs are.
Peril is such a layered and insightful account of a pivotal time in American history. It's a book that will make you think about the delicate nature of democracy, the struggles of leadership, and what it really means to be an American in these crazy times. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Peril, it becomes clear that this book is so much more than just a political thriller.
Right. It's about leadership, about resilience, and about the spirit of democracy in America.
Yeah, and it leaves you with all these questions about where we as a country go from here.
It really does. It doesn't give you easy answers, but it definitely makes you think about the challenges we face and the decisions we make.
One of the most striking things is how it really highlights that weight of history and the impact of the Trump presidency.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Biden walked into a really tough situation, not just with the pandemic and the economy, but also with the deep divisions and lack of trust that had gotten worse under Trump.
You know, Biden's commitment to unity and his belief that people from different sides can work together.
Yeah.
Those beliefs are put to the test in Peril. And it shows you just how hard it is to govern when everyone's so divided and compromise seems impossible.
You really see Biden's frustration as he deals with a Republican Party that seems more interested in blocking him than actually working with him. But you also see his determination to stick to his principles and his belief in talking things out and finding common ground.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is. And one of the big takeaways from Peril is that democracy is this ongoing project. It's not something we can just assume will always be there. It takes effort from all of us and a willingness to have those tough conversations.
Right, even with people we don't agree with.
Exactly. And Peril reminds us that every choice we make, individually and as a society, has an impact. It's like a call to action for all of us to be engaged citizens, be involved in our communities, and hold our leaders accountable.
Yeah.
Peril definitely highlights the problems we're facing, but it also has this hopeful message, reminding us that America has gone through tough times before and come out stronger. It shows how resilient our democracy is and how much people still believe in creating a better country.
If you're looking for a book that will make you rethink what you believe, make you think critically about democracy in America, and leave you feeling like your actions matter, then I highly recommend Peril.
It really is a great read.
It is a book that stays with you and makes you think about our past and how we can shape the future of our country.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Peril. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. Be sure to check out Peril for yourselves, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.